welcome to another episode of Disaster Empire Quick Views. This is the podcast where we talk to thought leaders and innovators in resilience. So I am really happy to have Mike Moquin with us here today, and we're going to dive right in. But first, I want to say to the audience, thank you so much for being here. And Mike, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. I can't wait for you to be able to share everything we're going to be talking about in terms of crisis management and data.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Great to have you here. Let's dive right in. So my first question for you is, you've been really looking at the topic of crisis management and data analytics for a while. Can you share with the audience what sparked your interest in that?
I think early on in my career is when I kind of got the bug. When I worked at Arizona State University, I ran their EMS program, and I would take call data from the calls we would go on, and I would look at all of the data that we had to see if there was any trends. So I would take our response times, chief complaints, the procedures that we would perform, and see if there was any sort of trending of, did we see a particular chief complaint at a particular time of the year? Was there a spike? And I would take that and then curate our training program so that we were better prepared to respond to a particular chief complaint at a particular time of year. So that was kind of where it all started. Little did I know that was foreshadowing the entire rest of my career so far. And when I started working at Amazon, that spark really turned into a passion, because at Amazon, everything is data centric. Every decision, every workflow, it's very, very data driven. And so that's where it got really ingrained into me. And now it's just part of my work ethic, where it's something I've brought in with me, where, working in the crisis management space, I've been trying to merge the two worlds, because I do think there is a lot of really good work that can happen utilizing analytics, but in the crisis space. So at this point, it's just ingrained into me, and I try to use it anytime I can.
So let's talk more about that, because in my experience, and I think a lot of our peers, business continuity management, crisis management, those are sometimes maybe more challenging areas, right? To find meaningful metrics and data. So what are you finding as you're diving into that topic? And can you share with us what some of your go-to tricks or findings are?
Yeah, definitely. We're in a really cool era where data is more valuable than monetary currency. If you're operating a business, would you rather have $1 million or data on 1 million customers? You're going to choose the data, because it's going to give you insights on how you can better operate your business. And it's going to, help you improve your methodology of your operations. And when you really look at it, every industry out there, especially retail, marketing, and social media, are kind of the drivers in using data in that space. But crisis and emergency management should not be left behind. And we really don't have to, because we have access to some really large open source data sets, National Risk Index or the Sheldis database, or internal company data or jurisdiction data. That we can use to leverage to find, trends in our risk and hazard analysis, or to help us measure how big of an impact an incident is having for our enterprise. And it can also help us determine if we're doing something on the preventative and preparedness side, is that helping in the response, piece? It's giving us some feedback. So, it's a really, really big tool that we can leverage and utilize. And you don't have to be a full-blown data scientist to use data to your advantage. You just have to be curious enough to want to learn, to see how can I leverage the data that I have and incorporate it into my crisis response world, either from a preventative side or in the actual response side or on the recovery side.
Hey, Mike, that's great. And if you're able to and willing to share any of those open data sources, I'm happy to add those to the show notes for the audience if they want to take, a deep dive or aren't aware of them already, because this channel is all about sharing our knowledge, right, as much as we can across the industry, because we are small but mighty, I think.
Absolutely.
And helping each other really, I think, helps everyone, right?
Yeah,
helps all
absolutely.
of our businesses. at the end of the day. So, hey, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests because this podcast and the blog are all about aspects of resilience. So, what does resilience mean to you? Because I think all of us are working through this term that's become a buzzword. It's been around for a while, but it's a buzzword now recently in the industry. So, how do you look at it?
So I kind of struggle with the word because you're absolutely right. It's become a buzzword. It's used, I think, more frequently than it's ever been before. And sometimes I think it's used in ways that it maybe shouldn't be. But, when I hear people try to define resilience, because it is very ambiguous, right? Everyone has their own definition of it. But most definitions I hear are, bouncing back from a disruption or returning to normal, where it's very focused on the recovery side of it. And I think that sometimes when we do that, we lose attention to the first three phases of emergency management: preparedness, prevention, mitigation. So I think resilience should really be just a holistic mindset where we're not just focusing on bouncing back and recovering. That's a part of it, but we also have to ensure that we're keeping good attention to the before something bad happens, so that we are prepared and we are preventing, we are mitigating. Because the more energy you put into those three pillars, hopefully, in theory, the less energy you have to put into the response and in the recovery. I think it's a holistic mindset that you need to, make sure that you're spreading your energy amongst all the pillars and then not just focus on the recovery side.
Absolutely. Mike, I love your concept of, front ending, if you will,
Yeah.
a lot of our work and not forgetting about the importance of preparedness. And I think that's the great part about the term resilience. And although, like you said, a lot of the focus is on the bouncing back to make sure businesses can get back to normal, which, I think we all know they never exactly get back to complete normal because we've learned from that situation or we have impacts that we need to recover from. But I think the value of resilience as well that you pointed out is really making sure we're leaning into or leaning forward in terms of that understanding of risk and then the ability to prepare an organization ahead of the bad thing happening, whether that's a community or whether that's, a corporation. So really love that thought from you. Hey, I want to jump back into data because I love data too, and I'm not a mathematician and I'm not a data analyst either, but, I really value the importance of what good data, right, can show us. And I think we all know garbage in, garbage out. But I usually see data as a great starting point to be able to tell a story and really understand capacity or where we might go in the future. So would you be able to share with us, maybe some examples of ways that you've leveraged data or interesting data sets that you've looked at that's really helped you to evolve and maybe some thoughts on how we can evolve the world of crisis management through that use of data?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think where data analytics can help evolve crisis management is it really changes the mindset of being proactive than reactive. Historically, crisis and emergency management has always been reactive. Something has happened and we're trying to manage what has occurred. Utilizing crisis management, you're able to take data sets and hopefully identify some trends that are occurring so that you can help narrow down your enterprise's risk profile to look back or look forward and say, we know what incidents we've dealt with in the past. We can use the data that we have available to help us, guide us into what we're going to deal with, this year and in the short-term future. And I think a really good tool that I've seen others use before is, a box with 4 quadrants. And there's the high frequency, high impact, high frequency, low impact, low frequency, low impact, and then low impact and high frequency. And, taking all the risks and putting them in all those quadrants so that you can, devote your time to attacking those high frequency, high impact ones first and working your way down. But how do you know what quadrant to put those risks in? Well, data analytics can help figure that out because you can look at, both historical incidents that your company has dealt with, as well as some open source intelligence methods to see what parts of the country are dealing with what types of issues at what time, what time of the year. And I think actually you wrote a really good blog post a while back. This was all the way back in the COVID time about why dashboards are better than BCPs. And I love that article because that's another, kind of factor in all of this, is that analytics really helps decision makers make objective decisions, right? You don't have to always have that gut feeling like you used to, in previous times. So by having dashboards where you're getting live information while an incident is happening, you can turn to those and you can use that information to make those objective decisions. In the after action phase, if someone questions, why was that decision made, you can look back and say, at that time, this is the information that we had, so this is why I made that decision. So it's also, it's not just evolving the preparedness side, but it's also helping evolve the response side, because now we're making data-driven decisions versus just kind of gut decisions that we're kind of feeling in the time. So it's evolving in those two aspects, and I'm excited to see as technology advances and AI gets integrated into our world, how much more we can go with the space.
I really like how you phrase that, and thank you. And I'm happy to report that we are looking at dashboards and how they can help and looking to leverage that. So I encourage everyone. It wasn't my idea. So I have to say that. And a lot of great minds out there were thinking about it. But really to take Mike's thought here, first on looking at the quadrants, because I think that's a key thing. Obviously, a lot of times out there we say, the knee jerk is, hey, natural disasters. Yep. And they continue to be one of the major events, and usually, top 1, 2, 3 in terms of impact to most organizations. But what I'm diving into is that, and I'm knocking on wood over here, fortunately for organizations I've engaged with, it's been low impact overall, which is great. It's maybe the most frequent thing that we respond to, but it isn't having, fortunately, the majority of the time, the greatest impact. And then where we're seeing the risk shift can be to the loss of power, right? Or the loss of network or utility, for various reasons, as we're moving more and more, especially in the service industry, to working from home or a hybrid situation. So I love how you're talking about how data can really help to inform that decision making and that in the moment, real time decision making, which I think is one of the hardest skills for folks who aren't in the crisis management space to really kind of build that muscle memory. So
yeah, and I think COVID really put a spotlight on how analytics can come into our world, right? There was that Johns Hopkins COVID dashboard that everyone in the world was watching, right?
Yep.
That is data analytics in crisis management. That is the best example, and I think that really ignited kind of a movement to say, have these tools at our fingertips, and it's going to help us in the response phase of what action are we going to take next. Let's see what the data is telling us, and then we could adapt and be agile based on where the data is leading us.
And I agree, that was one of the biggest pivots, right, from that event, is really having that high reliance on ongoing, near or as close to real-time data as possible to help make decisions. So really great example there. So looking forward with those lessons learned from COVID and other recent events, how do you think those measurable analytics can really help a crisis management program moving into the near future or the longer term?
Yeah, I think there is a two-prong answer to that. The first of which is kind of similar to what we were just talking about, where you can use data to help anticipate what your top risks may be. And knowing that, you can use that information as leverage to go to your stakeholders and say, we're seeing an increase in incidents year over year. They're getting more complex. They're happening more frequently and at the same time. We need more headcount, or we need more investment in technology for our team. And here's the data to support why we need those, resources. So, you're using the data that you have to show how valuable the team really truly is, and to show how the workload is increasing. Because as we're seeing year after year, we're seeing new disasters come up at the same time. I know you've talked about poly response or poly disasters before, and that's what the industry is nowadays. We have to really truly become all hazard teams because we don't know what is coming next. And I actually watched an interview with Stephen Kerr, and he mentioned that, he was in New York City for decades, and they never talked about wildfire smoke.
Yeah.
And why would they, right? They're in
Right.
downtown Manhattan. But that's just a great example of you don't know what's happening next. So, you want to have that data that you can show to, bring to stakeholders to say, hey, we need resources because we're seeing an upward trend in stuff. So that's kind of the first point where it can bring value. The second is it can also be a feedback device for your team to measure, are we responding to things efficiently? It's more of an internal measure, but you can take, did we send out a mass notification in time? Did we use the right method? Did it get to enough people? Did we meet our RTO objective, return to operations? You can use internal metrics to then judge and help the response that your team has made to see if it was more efficient and kind of get lessons learned from that. So those are kind of just two ways that we're adding value to the crisis program, leveraging analytics.
Yeah, I think those are great concepts. And, I was just talking to Donna Speckhard recently, and we were talking through the value of AI, which we won't even touch maybe unless you want to jump in a little bit of that. But it is another use of data, right? And it's more that open source data pool to pull from. But I think we really need to bring home your point, not be afraid of using data. And I think it's more of, in the past, maybe there just wasn't as good awareness of how we could pull from what we had to enable it to be valuable for real time. And like you were saying, COVID and other events have really helped us to think in a different way and opened our eyes about, okay, well, we may not be, selling, we may not be bringing in revenue dollars into our space, but really our objective is try to mitigate risk, definitely, and to protect the company and limit the damage when bad things happen. And I think really data can help you to do that, to really understand where your people are, where your greatest risks are, where your locations may be, even just to those quick hits of, hey, we've never dealt with a wildfire in New York City before. Let's take a quick look at what those impacts could be, and can help you to think differently than you might have about. I'm not going to say there are any average disasters for New York.
Right.
There aren't. But, I think all great thinking. And, I really encourage you to keep going in this space, because I think it's something that people struggle with for a lot of reasons. And so I'm so excited that you're sharing your thoughts about this, and know that you'll continue to do that. So, hey, on that topic, what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of, need or great data sets or examples of how analytics have really helped in the crisis management and emergency management space? You've talked about, kind of the wildfire example. You've talked about COVID. Is there anything else that you found in your experience has been really helpful?
I think the biggest trend, I love this question, by the way. Anytime I connect with someone on LinkedIn, this is the question I'm asking them, because I'm always so curious. For me, I think the biggest trend that I'm seeing is a really big growth spurt in the private sector, private companies bringing on emergency management professionals and crisis management professionals and bringing them in-house. Prior to COVID, it wasn't really a big talked about space, because companies, that really wasn't top of mind. And so I think COVID did make a lot of companies realize we are, at risk of being affected by disasters like this. And I think as more disasters come and the strength of these continue to rise, I think they'll realize that there is more of a need to have more in-house, crisis and emergency management folks. So I do see a rise of that in private companies, and that's exciting to see. And actually, just about a month ago, I saw a job position for a chief resiliency officer.
Yay.
So to see it, get all the way up to the C-suite is really exciting, because it's showing companies are taking it serious. In the face of a disaster, only the companies that really take crisis management and resilience serious are going to be the last ones standing, because they need to be prepared, because disasters are not going anywhere anytime soon, and it'll only get worse. So they need to bring those folks in-house to help guide them through kind of, disruptive times and stuff like that. So it's good to see that trend, and I hope it continues. The second thing that I've kind of seen is a change in how we're responding to incidents using data. Way back in the day, you used to have either a binder or a PDF file in some shared drive that shows how to respond to a hurricane, how to respond to a tornado. It was very incident specific. Mm-hmm. That's not the case anymore. Brad Milken did a great article that was called "Ditch the Plans, Get a Playbook," and I think that was a great article to describe a pivot where instead of making incident-specific procedures, crisis management teams really need to instill a general response framework that no matter the type of incident, whether it be a wildfire, smoke in New York City, or whatever it may be, you're able to at least get that initial response and get the people in the right room. And then, of course, every incident is going to have its specific, annexes and procedures, but that'll play out in the, initially or eventually in the response phase. Initially, you just got to get the conversation started and get the right people in the room. So I think we're also seeing a change in that aspect where we are becoming a little bit more agile and being able to adapt, because as incidents develop, they get more complex more quickly, and you need to be able to work in a gray space. Not everything is always going to be black and white where you can follow steps 1, 2, and 3. And that's where I think data really comes in and helps. Those dashboards that we were talking about, having that data visible is going to help you, either dodge right or dodge left, depending on how the incident develops. You're able to adapt with it. So it's really, really exciting to see the industry grow, I should say, and become more data dependent, because with more data, I think we just become, we can have better data-driven decisions. There was actually another blog post that you made that was talking about metrics and measurements. Yep. And there was a great quote in there from Grace Hopper that said, "One accurate measurement is worth 1,000 expert opinions." And I thought that quote just totally sums it up, because data is objective, right? It's hard to argue with the numbers. And when you have someone that is skeptical, that's where data transparency comes in. Show the sources, show what you did once you got the data to aggregate it or visualize it, and then show that's how you got your output. And when you see it from beginning to end, that's when you say, okay, I guess the numbers do make sense. So, it's really, really exciting to see the space continue to grow.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to Kenton Frizen from Canada, because he has really leaned into the space on metrics too and measurements, and so he helped inform that particular blog. So really great effort there. And one of the things that I was thinking about as you're talking through this is even just today, I was looking through some of my metrics and then thinking about COVID. And cascading impacts and potential for polycrisis, and really looking at, as I said earlier, although natural disasters will continue to be impactful, for some businesses, they may not be, again, knocking on wood, the most in terms of true interruption for employees being able to work and operations, or even, locations and reliance there. But, I'm seeing the rise of geopolitical risks having the potential for impacts and alignment with crisis events occurring. And so that's something I really encourage the audience to take a look at if they haven't already, because I'm seeing spikes there. And although cyber security and cyber attacks still continue to be a trend and concern, and I will, freely say that, yeah, they are very impactful when they happen. They may not be the most, occurring or the most ongoing occurring. So this is where, as you were saying, Mike, the data can really help you to look at that and enable you to inform your leadership on all aspects, and really bring to light, well, hey, this area is something that ours our bread and butter in terms of response, but these two areas are really the ones where we want to focus our resources and our exercising, right, and our planning right now, because from our data, we're seeing that these are the ones that could really cause the greatest impact and really influence overall resilience. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. You summed it up perfectly.
As we're wrapping up tonight, is there anything else that you wanted to share with this audience that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet?
I just want to share that, like I said in the beginning, you don't have to be a full-on data scientist to get into the weeds here. There's plenty of free online courses that teach just simply the basics, or you can even just dive into Excel and do a lot of really good work simply just in Excel. You don't have to invest in big, data programs like Tableau and SQL. You can, right? The deeper you get in, the more you can do with it. But it might be scary and intimidating to some to get into, and I completely understand that because that's the position I was in, and at times I'm still in because I'm always constantly learning. But you don't have to be a big data scientist to utilize the data in the crisis space. You just have to be willing to learn.
Yeah. And I think to that point, really look at what are the resources you could leverage internally. Is there a platform, right, that you're already using that can help you to provide that data? Or a lot of companies use Power BI and are feeding data in from various sources to create those dashboards, for example. And that could be another avenue, or just simple Excel, right? It doesn't have to be fancy to start off with. Like you said, just bringing that data together and starting to take a look at it is so important. Hey, Mike, is there anything else in terms of your background or a fun fact that you might want to share with the audience tonight?
Yeah, my fun fact is I have a very loud 5-year-old beagle that I'm actually surprised has not been barking because he usually is sleeping until the exact moment I get on a video call.
Course.
So the fact that we haven't heard him is actually shocking to me right now.
Well, I'm sad he didn't make an appearance because I'm a big dog lover, but that's a good thing sometimes, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the channel. And how can people connect with you if they want to follow you or learn more?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn. I try to be as active as I can. So feel free to search Mike Moquin on LinkedIn and connect with me. And I'd be happy to chat with anyone about the industry or data or beagles, whatever you want to talk about.
Exactly. Well, hey, if you have access to that article, I'd love to link that as well for people who aren't familiar with it. And thank you so much for being a supporter of the channel. Thank you for taking the call. And I put out an ask for people to come on and talk about things they're working on. Really love this topic. It's definitely an important one. And I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.